Canada. They were foolish to do it. And so I said, we're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act.
U.S. President Donald Trump repeating his rhetoric over Canada becoming the 51st state, days after saying trade negotiations between the two countries have ended.
It started with a sentence President Trump declared, "We're done talking." In one abrupt move, he ended trade negotiations with Canada, America's closest neighbor and longest-standing ally. It wasn't just about taxes, it wasn't just about trade. What followed was something far more provocative. Trump said, "We will be fine with Canada. I love Canada, frankly. Canada should be the 51st state." The shock wasn't just in the statement, it was in the timing, the tone, and the threat that came right after new tariffs, 7 days and zero room for compromise. You know, this policy actually was introduced by the previous administration in Canada. It was bad policy then, and it's bad policy now reign, and now Carney has no income, so he's trying to find any way he can to make income. At the center of the explosion was a tax, a 3% levy on digital services introduced by Canada, and set to take effect on July 1st. It targets major U.S. tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Meta investor Kevin O'Leary. Described the tax as a desperate measure pointing to Trudeau-era energy restrictions as the root of Canada's revenue crisis. Though long in the making, planned since 2019 and passed into law in 2024, it was the moment of collection that triggered Trump's fury. According to estimates from Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, this tax could bring in nearly $7 billion US over 5 years. Trump didn't just oppose it, he viewed it as an attack, one that demanded immediate retaliation, and so he slammed the brakes on all trade talks, warning that tariffs would be imposed on key Canadian exports within the week. But this wasn't just about big tech, it was about power politics and old grudges. It's pure Trump, it's the way he negotiates. He throws live munitions at something and he hopes that something in his favor will come of it. Trump has never hidden his disdain for Canada's supply management system, a framework that protects dairy, poultry, and egg farmers through quotas and price controls. It was a sticking point in the original NAFTA talks, and despite being enshrined in the USMCA agreement Trump himself signed, he's now calling it unfair. Then came the metals. Steel and aluminum are back in the firing line, industries that have seen tariffs rise and fall multiple times since 2018. To Trump, Canada is a dependent partner who enjoys U.S. market access without paying its dues. That's the justification he gives, not just for trade penalties, but for something even more dramatic. By suggesting Canada become the 51st state, Trump is using the language of absorption to assert dominance. Critics call it rhetorical theater, but for Trump it's a power play, and it's a move designed to force a response. You know, no one takes seriously here in the United States his talk about the 51st state, but he does seem to be using it as a form of leverage, or hoping that it could be used as leverage to get what he perceives to be a better deal. While Trump turns up the volume, Canada turns inward. Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided direct confrontation behind closed doors. Senior officials continue quiet outreach to Washington, trying to salvage some path forward. The Canadian government shows no signs of abandoning its agricultural protections, a red line in every negotiation. But the digital services tax, that's another matter. Sources within the Canadian Finance Ministry speaking on background to local media have acknowledged the DST may be flexible if it leads to a broader deal. Meanwhile, Trump is under pressure. His 90 deals in 90 days campaign is running out of time before the July 9th deadline. His signature spending bill, nicknamed the Big Beautiful Bill, faces resistance in the Senate, and even Elon Musk, once a close ally, is publicly criticizing his economic priorities. Trump needs a win. Canada, for now, refuses to hand him one. So what's next if Canada caves on the DST? A reset in negotiations is possible. If they hold the line, Trump could follow through on tariffs that would hit Canadian steel, aluminum, and dairy, damaging sectors already under pressure from inflation and slowing global demand. But the deeper risk is strategic. Trump isn't just testing Canada, he's testing the boundaries of trade diplomacy itself, turning up pressure, making personal demands, blurring the line between economic and political integration in this high-stakes standoff. There are no easy outcomes, but one truth is clear. Trump is not negotiating for just a trade deal. He's negotiating for leverage, legacy, and the illusion of control. And while markets react and headlines swirl, it's workers, consumers, and families on both sides of the border who will carry the cost. That they just don't think they can count on the United States to be a reliable partner, because reliability got said a lot in this conversation. As the dust settled from the NATO summit, two very different strategies became clear. Trump was still focused on bilateral deals, pushing his 90 deals in 90 days campaign with vague announcements, but few signed agreements. Meanwhile, Carney had already secured a long-term partnership with Europe and was preparing to confront Trump's tariffs head-on, but time was running out and the stakes were rising in Canada. Economic pain was spreading beyond industrial towns according to statistics. Canada layoffs in the manufacturing sector hit a 5-year high by May. Supply chains slowed, investment stalled, and small businesses that depended on U.S. cross-border trade faced rising costs and falling demand. Communities like Windsor, Ontario, where auto parts flow south into Michigan, saw shifts canceled and plants idled. Carney faced growing political pressure to act fast. He met with provincial premiers, trade unions, and business leaders to craft a unified approach. The message was clear: the U.S. is still a key partner, but Canada can't wait indefinitely behind closed doors. Ottawa also explored expanding counter-tariffs. The Prime Minister signaled that measures could go up or down, depending on whether progress was made by July 21st. With the EU deal in hand and investor interest growing, Canada had options. European institutions, including the European Investment Bank and private pension funds, were reportedly eyeing Canadian infrastructure bonds, an indirect buffer against American pressure. Carney wasn't bluffing, he was building leverage. So we are working non-stop, really 7 days a week on this. We've had 3 meetings, we're meeting again early next week, so it's, the pace is as fast as it can be. We're working as hard as we can. The current round of U.S.-Canada negotiations is being led by Ambassador Kristen Hillman, alongside U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. Meetings have taken place weekly since the G7 summit in Canonesis, but progress has been slow. Hillman said publicly that both sides are working 7 days a week, but admitted that Canada cannot force the U.S. to act. Ottawa continues to push for tariff rollbacks, at least on strategic goods like steel and clean energy inputs, but so far, Washington hasn't budged. Analysts close to the White House say Trump is prioritizing a unified message for his 90 deals campaign and doesn't want to show weakness by backing down on tariffs, especially not to a close ally during a re-election year. Trump, preoccupied with his global tariff strategy and political messaging ahead of the midterms, appears unwilling to offer concessions. White House sources told Politico that the 30-day timeline was a Canadian proposal, not a U.S. commitment. But to Carney, that didn't matter for him. The clock wasn't just diplomatic, it was political. Canadian workers couldn't wait, and neither could the economy. That's why Ottawa tied future counter-tariffs directly to the July 21st deadline. If no deal is signed, new measures will be triggered that includes tariffs on select U.S. agricultural goods, aerospace components, and consumer exports. It's not a trade war Canada wants, but it's one it's now prepared for. Back in Washington, Trump continues to tout his economic agenda as bold, tough, and necessary. He claims tariffs are winning leverage that America's partners will fall in line, but Carney's approach is changing the equation by securing a new strategic anchor in Europe. Canada is no longer playing defense. It's writing a new playbook, one where American dependence is no longer assumed with just weeks to go. Both countries are watching, waiting, and preparing their next moves, because whether a deal is signed or not, the U.S.-Canada relationship is no longer what it used to be. And no matter how this ends, one thing is clear: Mark Carney didn't wait for Trump to change his mind. He changed Canada's direction. All right, Ed, where are the deals? Well, I think this is just more evidence that these deals aren't really deals at all this summer. All eyes are on July 9th. That's the deadline for President Trump's 90 deals in 90 days campaign, a bold promise to reset America's global trade ties. But as the clock runs down, 2 stories dominate. Canada is threatening retaliation, and China's e-commerce exports are collapsing under pressure. Trump says deals are happening, but most appear to be announcements, not agreements, with global partners still waiting. The question now is what's really been accomplished, whether it's a deal with Canada, or a deal with the UK, or a deal with China. I mean, every time this happens, we all get very excited, and then we go look at, the terms of the agreement, of which there are usually none. When Trump launched his tariff offensive back in early April, the pitch was bold. The U.S. would pause some tariffs for 90 days, while negotiating fairer, more reciprocal trade terms, 1 deal per day. That was the idea. There's no deal here. But by late June, only 2 framework agreements have been reached, one with the UK and one with China. Neither has been finalized. The UK deal includes tariff cuts on autos and aerospace, but it sidesteps core issues like steel. The China deal, announced in London, merely outlines temporary tariff relief in exchange for Beijing suspending its retaliatory measures. Meanwhile, other trading partners are still waiting or walking away. The European Union continues urgent negotiations with Washington but has yet to secure a concrete outcome. Their offer of a 0-for-0 tariff exchange remains on the table, but no commitment has been made. And then there's Canada. Despite being a top U.S. trade partner, Canada has seen no signed agreement since April 2nd. Nearly all Canadian exports to the U.S. have faced a 25% tariff. Ottawa responded with countermeasures and a firm warning if no deal is reached by July 9th. New tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum will take effect on July 21st. Prime Minister Carney has made it clear Canada won't wait forever when tariffs are like laying a 10% tea consumption tax on America. Tariffs still on inflation, still coming. Prices are going to rise. With so many trade talks stalled or unresolved, the economic burden is starting to show. Especially at home, consumers are already absorbing higher prices, while official inflation data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in April and May showed moderate movement. Experts like Fed Chair Jerome Powell have warned that the full impact of tariffs likely won't appear in economic reports until fall 2025. That's because it takes months for price hikes to move through the supply chain. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady in June despite heavy pressure from the White House to cut them. Powell has made it clear the Fed won't act until it sees hard evidence of how tariffs are affecting inflation and the labor market. Some of that evidence is beginning to surface according to data cited on Fox Business. The value of small parcel shipments from China to the U.S. fell 40% year-over-year. E-commerce platforms like Shein and Temu have reported double-digit sales declines, and in Canada, construction firms and manufacturers reliant on U.S. steel are reporting sharp cost increases due to retaliatory tariffs. Approval ratings are shifting too. A YouGov Economist poll in mid-June showed Trump's support on economic issues had dropped from 45% at the start of the year to just 35% as prices climb and uncertainty grows. Political pressure is mounting. Beyond price impacts, the strategy risks alienating key allies. China, while cooperating on temporary tariff cuts, is pushing back against tech restrictions. New U.S. limits on semiconductor exports have shaken markets. Analysts warned these tensions could fuel China's drive to overtake the U.S. in AI in Canada. Prime Minister Carney has voiced frustration with Washington's unilateral approach. Ottawa views the U.S. tactics as coercive, even toward close allies. The EU, meanwhile, is holding firm warning it may pursue action at the WTO if tariff hikes resume after July 9th. We're reaching July 9th. The 90-day pause is coming to an end, and here we are. We have no deals. Trump's 90 deals in 90 days campaign began with the promise of a new trade order. But with less than 2 weeks remaining, only uncertainty has truly materialized. The real question isn't whether more deals will be announced, it's whether any of them will actually matter.